Hi everybody, welcome to week 2 of Intro to JavaScript, and this chapter 2 is what we'll be covering. And one of the big reasons I like this book is because it throws you right into the fire. We'll be looking at the beginnings of JavaScript this week, and we'll even do a couple of apps. Chapter 2 is getting started fast with JavaScript, and let's dive in. So what we want to do is make sure that you get a look at JavaScript applications. You haven't learned much so far. You've been through WebD 152, you know HTML, you probably know how to use a code editor, which is cool, maybe how to test it in a browser. This time we're going to start about teaching you about debugging an application and how to test it a little bit better. So we'll be using Chrome today, and some of the things I want you to get out of this is I want you to describe 2 ways to include JavaScript in the body of an HTML document. Now, we went over that last week in the first week, where you could put it in the footer or you can put it in the head tag. And this is important because you have to understand how JavaScript works. If you're just trying to access elements, you want to make sure you put it in the footer. But over time, you'll get the hang of it. And the other thing we need you to understand about case sensitivity. We'll be talking about variables and how they're case sensitive, what a semicolon does at the end of each statement, how white space relates to the syntax for JavaScript. We'll also list the primary rules for creating a JavaScript identifier. And that means how JavaScript accesses an element. We'll teach you how to comment your code, which is, by the way, a great thing to have in your portfolio. Well-commented code is something employers look for because they know you're a team player who likes to communicate. We're going to be teaching you about data types. In this case, numeric, string, and Boolean. It's a little bit more simple than other languages if you've learned those already. I want you to understand variable declarations, assignment statements. We'll be talking about let and const keywords to declare constants and variables, and how we would use the var keyword to declare variables and constants. We'll be going over operators, plus, minus, multiplication, divide, all that. Rules for evaluating a math expression, order of precedence, just like you learned in math. Don't worry, there's not much math here, but there is syntax, a lot of syntax going on. And the faster you learn that syntax, the quicker you can debug errors. When I first learned JavaScript, I got comfortable after a while. It took me a while to pick it up because I wasn't really a programmer. I was actually a sports writer for a while. That's what my undergrad was. And so I'm just like most of you, where you're like, maybe I haven't done programming before, but I learned to talk to it over time. So if it doesn't come right away, it's okay, but you have to just keep trying and keep building things out. And I'm hoping the types of homework assignments that I give you in this class will allow you to build that relationship with JavaScript. So we'll be separating strings and variables with the plus operator, and using also a template string literal. All that means is that we need you to be able to output messages, text, to the browser, and I want you to know how JavaScript does it. We'll learn escape sequences. \n is a way to escape. And what that means is you could put any kind of character in a statement and JavaScript will ignore it if it's escaped. That's all that means. So we'll be discussing properties, we'll be discussing the window object. That's what alert prompts, and then you see there, that's all window object stuff, like when you have a pop-up on your browser. And then we'll talk about parse int and parse float, which turns strings into numbers, write, and toFix, which are string methods. All this stuff we're going to get to. It's a big week. So the script element, let's start there. There's 2 attributes. Attributes, if you go back to HTML, are just anything that has an equal sign after it. There's source, and there's type. In this case, you see script source equals calculate _ mpg.js. This means that the JS needs to be in the same exact folder as the HTML document. A lot of times we put JS files inside our JS folder because we may have multiple JS files. In that case, we would script source JS / calculate _ mpg.js. And we'll be doing a miles per gallon application today. So this is an example of where the previous slide outsources an external JS, this one right here embeds it right into the body section. And there's no functions here, it's just statements. Alert the calculate MPG application. This would create a little pop-up alert box that says that same message. Notice how it has a semicolon. Then we have an assignment. We're saying we're going to let the word miles, and it's going to be called a variable. Whoops, I'm sorry, I clicked it. We're going to let miles equal what the user entered when they when the prompt box comes up and reads enter miles driven. So if I type in 40, then miles would be equal to 40. Then we're going to use parseInt on miles to make sure it's a number. And now what we can do is do the same thing with gallons and let miles per gallon equal miles divided by gallons. And then we'll make sure that the MPG has the miles per gallon plus this. So MPG holds the value of miles divided by gallons. So that's just an overview. We're going to go into it much more in depth. I do like to throw you into the fire. But, you know, this, if you want to have a little fun for a second, and nothing I like better than deviating away from a PowerPoint, is to just go here, take a quick look, and I'm just going to copy and paste it right here, and we'll not even worried about that. These characters, by the way, would trick off an error. And all I'm going to do is do a test.html and take a look, because I don't want you feeling overwhelmed at all. You get plenty of time to learn this. Pick out what you can, and here we go. So see this? That's the alert. This page is, that is line 3. See the calculate MPG application? Next, enter miles driven. That's the prompt. This is the prompt. See enter miles driven? It's right here. I'll say 40, just like we just spoke about. Gallons used, I'll use 1.5. That's a prompt box. Now it says miles per gallon equals 40. That's because it didn't float. It has the number. So we'll try this one more time because I made it way too simple because it's the first slide. Let's do 40 and 2. And your miles per gallon is 20. So the way we do our applications in this course is we always get better. We build when we see a problem like 40 divided by 1.2. That did not work in the mileage. It said 40. It treated it like 1. And that's because of parseInt. ParseInt turned it into 1. Any hoodles. Enough of the, the distractions here. I just wanted to show you how that worked. You saw me copy and paste the script. I put it right into the into the text editor and viewed it in my browser. So that was an internal embedded JavaScript. And external would be if it's in a different file. I'll tell you as a best practice right away though. When you're developing and you're learning, embed it. That way you can see the code instead of having to toggle back between the HTML document and the JavaScript. And then when you're ready and you're happy and it works, then you can make it external. It's just easier. And the more you grow and once you get used to that, I think you'll be happy with having external. But as a beginner, you want to avoid frustration. Okay, big thing here, noscript. Think about the 2% or so people that don't have JavaScript turned on. Now, why might they not have it turned on? Well, a lot of people have that Norton antivirus, and if you install it, there's a little sign that says, what level of security would you like? And most people say the highest, and they don't read the fine print that says that JavaScript and browsers will be disabled. Anyway, we got to deal with that. So one way to deal with it is using HTML's noscript tag. And what that means is if the browser doesn't have JavaScript turned on, you would see this, H2. To get the header 2 tag, to get the most from this website, please enable JavaScript. And then down here you see that. So if I turn off JavaScript, that's what we'd see. So that's a good thing. That's the script tags here. A lot of times you'll see HTML comments around this so that it doesn't output like HTML to the browser. But the noscript tag is one of the best ways to deal with that. So right here, welcome to my website, and this is what what that previous page has. So that's an important thing. It's surprising, but if you think that Amazon gets what 2 billion hits a day or something in that wild area, well, that's 2 billion, and what's 2% of that? It's quite a bit. So there you go. I think it's 40 million. I think that's what 2% of that is, just off the cuff of my head. But how to disable JavaScript in Chrome, I'm going to go past this because it's not that important. But just know that you would toggle the block switch back in case it were shut off. Okay, so JavaScript is case sensitive. What does that mean? It means like variables. Like we had a variable in our first script that we just looked at, MPG. If I put something in that variable, I can only reference it with a case sensitive match. I can only call that variable's case with the exact case to get it. Each JavaScript statement ends in a semicolon, and this is important because the browser will not render an error if you don't have a semicolon and you end it in the JavaScript statement has its own line. So it's up to us to do that, and we need to do that. Just do it. It's for organization, and it helps us when we do what's called minified code. That's a long story about what that is, but if you want to have the time, look up JavaScript minification, and you'll see that it removes line breaks from each statement, and therefore the semicolon is the only way to tell the end of the statement. JavaScript also ignores white space inside the statements, so whatever's there, it doesn't matter. Lastly, when JavaScript's in strict mode, it disallows certain features. We're not going to do that till the end of the course. It'll be probably week 12 or 13 when we put it in strict mode. So what I do is I'll build my apps and then I'll put it in strict mode at the end when I launch. That helps me. It helps me debug. But I usually work. I haven't done this in a couple of years, but I usually juggle a lot of projects at once, and there's not a lot of time to get things done. So what I'm searching for is functionality that will satisfy the client first, and then what I'll do is make the code better. Okay, so this is an example of syntax rules, and it's probably not going to make a lot of sense to you, but what I have here is a variable that equals a block of code. So basically, just notice that each line ends in a semicolon, okay? Notice how email address 1 is camel cased. You don't have to camel case your variables. Do what you find comfortable. I think you'll find through my code where I'm, coding from scratch. I do that a lot in this course. I do it for a few reasons because I want you to see how imperfect I am and how it's normal to screw up a lot, and that, we troubleshoot 80% of the time, completely normal. But you'll find that I use small case all the time. And someone once told me that the best coder is a lazy coder. And I'm pretty lazy. So what I do is I don't even want to use the shift key to even capitalize one letter. That's my cut, that's my system. It works for me. Some people do Pascal casing. That would be the first digit and the middle digit of the first syllable, or the first letter of each syllable is uppercase. That's Pascal casing. And this is camel casing. You do you, but just be consistent so that when you go to code, you don't waste time debugging. Okay, so here we've got case sensitivity. We've got sentences or statements that end in semicolons. Do that first, okay? Now, if you have multiple lines, you may need to split a statement. Like if a statement takes a long time, you may need to split it. And you do it after relational operators, opening braces, all that stuff. Don't split a statement after an identifier value or return keyword, closing bracket or closing parentheses. So basically, if you look at this split statement right here, you see how I ended it right here. This is the opening brace, and then the closing brace, and the else if. So we're ending statements like this right here. This is an entire statement. See, if the email address is this, then do this. That really is one statement, but it's over 3 lines. And notice how the indentation goes. So we do something called PSR4 indentation. Each indentation is a tab, 4 spaces. I want your stuff to work. I want you guys to be happy. I'm not going to, nail you on indentation on grades ever. But it's something to know, and it's going to help you down the road. So that's a little bit of an example of how to split a statement. You'll see it so much that you'll get it. So identifiers. Identifiers really are variables. They can contain letters, numbers, the underscore, and even the $sign, but they cannot start with a number. So if you see something like email address 1, that's an identifier. They have to be case sensitive. They can be any length, but you want to keep them small because you don't want to type too much, right? But they can't be the same as reserved words. I will give you a sheet. It's somewhere in the course right now of reserved words for JavaScript. It's very difficult to use them. They're going to be obvious. When you see the sheet, you'll know what I'm talking about. Avoid using global properties and methods as identifiers. That's not going to make sense yet. It will soon. So these are valid identifiers. You get a variable here, index 1, $sign can be an identifier, tax rate, calculate, click, $sign with a word. So these are all things that hold data. So this is camel casing right here, which I just mentioned. And this is snake casing with an underscore. I don't use either. I would use tax rate. I would use calculate, click. I would use email address, future value without the underscore. That's just me. So meaningful names, this is important. Whether they're case sensitive or not, what you want to do is make sure that you have meaningful names. And I think the ones here were meaningful for what they're used for. They're very specific. They're saying either use camel or snake. However, if you want to use, see, I just skip the underscore because lowercase to me communicates what I need to communicate. Now this is that reserved words in JavaScript. So what I do is I print this out and I put it on the wall and I just watch it. So they're all words that are actually in the language of JavaScript, and that's why they wouldn't be a variable. And that's why we don't use them. So once you learn all the words in JavaScript, which is not that much, it'll make sense. This, throw, throws, transient. So it's going to take probably 2 courses to get this thing in your head. But what'll happen is your stuff won't work. Your code will break. And it doesn't always break. Like Chrome, I found a lot of reserved words as identifiers actually works because I did testing on it. So this is an example of JavaScript code with comments highlighted. So this is a multi-line comment. You see the / an asterisk, and then a comment, and then the closing asterisk and /. That's for multi-line. This is for single line. Pretty easy, pretty normal. I like the way this slide is because it explains the code. And it's real easy for like your teammates to see what you're doing. So yeah, anything that you perceive that's hard to understand or that you think your teammates on the job might feel like it's hard to understand, use comments. You're going to be having a CodePen account and a GitHub account. And generally when you apply for a job, people look at those accounts and see your code. The more comments in there, the more you're going to look like a team player. That's hard to teach. It's hard to teach that attitude. I'm pretty sure I can teach anyone to program. I'm not sure I can teach someone team play. So that's a way to get ahead. I know that I usually look at that stuff when I hire someone. So don't use comments unnecessarily. But if they're always descriptive, that's always necessary. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. I mean, I wouldn't leave notes through a comment. That's what Slack is for, or other messaging tools. Yeah, so you can use comments to disable portions of code as well. So we've kind of talked about this already. Statement is one line of code. If I have a variable that equals something and I assign it a value, that's a statement. White space is just the space that might be inside a string being letters or anything that has value that gets outputted. Strict mode are things that demand safe coding practices. Identifiers are variables. Camel casing has that middle, the second syllable has the capital first letter. Snake casing is all lowercase with an underscore. Comment and comment out are the same thing. We comment out code so we can test it, test other code. So on to primitive data types. And what these are the most basic. That's why the word primitive. So there's numbers. There's strings, which can be letters or numbers. But see, if something's a string, you can't really perform mathematical stuff on it. Mathematical operations. Boolean, which means true or false. A symbol, which is a symbol. Null, which means no value. Undefined, which means it doesn't even hold null. And big int, which is the latest release of JavaScript, the 2020 version, is a large integer. These are examples of number values. So 15 is an integer, minus 21 negative, 21.5 obviously decimal, negative decimal value, and floating point notation at the bottom there, which we'll be going over in one of our homework assignments. So numbers can be integers or decimals. Generally, decimals are stored as what we call floating point numbers, and the most important thing about that is you understand the word float, because float refers to decimals, and you're going to be using parse float as a function to turn numbers that have decimals away from strings into numbers. So this is interesting too. If a result is stored in a number data type that is larger or smaller than the data type can store, it will be stored as the value infinity or minus infinity. So if that's never, it's probably not going to happen. There's no reason that it should. I can't see a use case for that. These are string values. It's just, and you can see the interchanging with double quotes and single quotes. You can use either one, but they must start and end with the same type of quotation mark. Some things like that I think are a little intuitive. You'll probably, if you ever make that mistake, the console will tell you. That's an important thing not to have happen, but you'll fix it. As long as you keep the console open, you'll see these errors. And an empty string is a string that contains no characters. So if you just have two quotation marks with nothing between them, not even a space, then it's an empty string. So there's only two Boolean values, true and false. And that's it. We often use these things just in conditional statements. So basically, if it's true, if it's equivalent to true, yes or on. False would be no or off. All right, so this is super important. So perk your ears up to this boring stuff here. How to declare and initialize a variable. The word let is a way to define a variable. You're going to see that I use var a lot in the first few weeks of this course. Let is an ES6 construct that does not have global scope. You're free to use that. I just want to explain why in my code I use var a lot. I use var because I want students to not be frustrated when they have a variable that loses scope. Scope meaning it loses its value, because let's say we declare a variable outside of a block of code called a function. If I let variable that value, it could lose its value inside the function. So what I'm doing is making all my variables in the first few weeks accessible everywhere. And that's so that we don't have to debug. We can look just at the fundamentals. But let works in what we call constructs, which means that if I'd used let in some construct like a condition or a loop, which you haven't even learned yet, you've seen a condition already. Let me show you I'm going to go back to that, the code here. Okay, so this, you see we're using let a lot here. What will happen is when this function ends, let releases its value. So it's a way to speed things up a little bit. There was another one here that, yeah, these are consts. This is another variable declaration. Consts are never changing. But var, let, or const are the ways to declare variables. And let me go back to, I think it was on slide 25 here. Here we go. Yeah, so we're assigning count equals 1. If I alerted count, I would alert the value 1. So I think of variables like a shoebox. All right? Let's say we have a pair of Nikes. We got a shoebox that has the Nike swoosh on it. That swoosh would be the count in this variable example. So swoosh equals what's inside, which is the sneakers. So all this is really a label, and when we access this, it holds that. And that's because we have this little equal sign, which is an assignment operator. So we're making count the word equal 1. If you've had algebra at all, this should make a lot of sense. Like x equals 1, y equals 5. Those are variables, and they hold value. Oh, this is a variable reassignment, by the way. So if I have count equals 1, and I make count equal to the count plus 1, count would now be equal to 2. All right, this is a constant which we just discussed. It's not changing. It's the same as for variable with the const keyword, and what happens is we can't reassign it because I have a const here. It's never changing, meaning even now it would still be 1. So the way JavaScript works, it places all variable and constant declarations in memory first. That's called hoisting. So it's in the variable. When a variable is declared with the var keyword, when that is actually hoisted or in memory, JavaScript initializes it with a value of undefined. Because of this, we can access the variable before you declare it, but its value will be undefined. When a variable that's declared with the let keyword is hoisted, JavaScript doesn't initialize it, which means you're saving processing power, you're saving memory. That's also true of a constant. Because of this, you can't access the variable or constant before you declare it. So basically, if you use var, you can declare it with undefined. If you use let or const, you can't access it before you declare it. And that's a big reason why in the first few weeks I use var. But don't think that var is the only thing out there. Because I noticed in the first few weeks I did it all the time. Because I wanted to keep that variable initialized. So anyway, this is an example of a variable declared with the var keyword and accessed before it's declared, alert val1, and this would be undefined because it's not defined yet. It's not declared. So if I do var val1 equals value, this would display value. Now with let, we do this, nothing will happen, but we'll get a reference error. After we do this, we would display the value. So that kind of makes sense. If you play with it in a text document, you're going to be fine. On that note, let's start. This will be the end of part 1. This is a rather long presentation lecture, and we'll start with part 2 in a second in a separate video.